Here's a fun topic. Let's talk about playing over chord changes. We're going to take a minimalistic, bare bones approach to this concept, because I think that's just the best way to get introduced to it. If it's not something you're already familiar with, essentially the whole strategy of playing over chord changes pretty much opens up new possibilities as far as what you can do musically when you're soloing. So you're no longer just sticking to a one-size-fits-all scale or even a handful of scales. You're more focused on the actual chords and the progression you're playing over, and you're highlighting them as you go through your soloing. So in a nutshell, playing over the chord changes just means outlining the chords as they're changing. So we're gonna take a very, very simple look at a very, very common, very popular style chord progression, a 1-4-5, We're gonna take a look at the blues because, foundationally, that's just where a lot of Western music, if not all Western music, stems from. So we're gonna take a look at that, and it's gonna be applicable pretty much whatever you adapt it to, whatever style, it all comes down to this basic concept. So we're gonna use 1-4-5 progression in the key of A. I chose the key of A because you can actually drone out. I like to drone out my open strings when it comes to getting acquainted with, musical topics like this, because that just kind of helps you learn how to do it without the crux of any external backing or anything like that. That way it can just be you and your guitar. No matter where you are, you can work this out. So the key of A, you have the 1 chord, which is A, right? You can have the open A, then the 4 chord is D, got an open D string, and then the 5 chord is E. So you have the you can drone out open strings for all 3 of those chords. So the way to approach highlighting chord changes obviously comes down to knowing the chords, but it's not just knowing the chords as much as it is understanding the target notes, right? Knowing the chord tones, the certain notes within the chord that you target, so that way you can use them in tandem with your favorite scales, like I did in the beginning of the video. I just played minor pentatonic stuff, but just combining that with the use of really just triads. I was just taking little fragments of scales, 3-note fragments of scales, of the chords, and I was highlighting the changes. So let's take a look. We're just gonna focus on the top 3 strings here, right? G, B, and high E. We're gonna look at 3 triads for each of those 3 chords. Starting with the 1 chord, right? Here's our first triad, just outlining a major chord. So we have the 6th fret here on the G string, and then we're gonna bar the 5th fret on the B and the high E strings. So that right there is a 3rd, a 5th, and a root, which are the 3 fundamental basic necessities, right? As far as like the notes that make up a chord. A minimum amount of notes for a chord is 3, and it's those particular 3 notes that signify that we're outlining an A major, right? So that's our first triad. That's over our 1 chord. Our 4 chord is D, right? So we're gonna take a triad, a D triad, but we wanna pick one that's in the same neighborhood, right? Really close by. I don't want you to have to, venture too far, across the fretboard to find these ideas, because really all you need is just to get to know the triads, as far as the fundamental notes themselves, not so much, because, you can play multiple positions on the fretboard in multiple octaves, as I've mentioned. So the D triad right here, it's 7th fret on the G string, 7th fret on B, 5th fret on high E. So we have our A, our 1 chord, we have our D, our 4 chord. Notice how you can hear the difference in the, you can hear that those are different chords. And then finally we have our 5 chord, which is E, and I use this triad right here. All right, so it's close enough as far as like the proximity of it to the other triads. It's essentially taking the D chord shape, right, and bringing it up 2 frets. So we got our first finger on the 4th fret of the G string, and then our 3rd finger is on the 5th fret of the B string, and then our 2nd finger here is on the 4th fret of the high E string. And like I said, each of these triads contain the fundamental basic notes that make up a chord. This one, right, we have our 3rd, 5th, root. This one we have our root, 3rd, no, I'm sorry, this is our, no, it is our root, yeah. Our root, our third, and our fifth, yeah. Yeah, so root, third, fifth. I just had to double check myself there. And then for this one, I think it's fifth, root, third, I believe. So it's all those same notes, just in their own order, right? To make up these different little finger shapes. So when we use those in tandem with, let's say like the minor pentatonic scale, just to keep it in the blues context, we can highlight the chord changes. So when I was playing, droning out that A string, right? And you know, the fact that I'm playing minor pentatonic and using a major triad is totally a hallmark of blues. That's like a very common like bending of the rules, you could say, where in blues you can teeter between minor and major tonalities by way of the pentatonic, and it totally works somehow, right? Even though it's technically, you know, like not falling in line with the music theory rules behind it, but I mean, you know, rules are made to be broken anyway. So that still somehow works. It's a little tense, but in a good way. So we can use that triad, and it's right there in the neighborhood of the A minor pentatonic scale. And if you don't already know it, by the way, it's 5-7 on low E. I'm sorry, 5-8 on low E. I'm sorry. 5-7 on A, 5-7 on D, 5-7 on G, 5-8 on B, 5-8 on high E. Okay, and we don't even really need to use the whole scale. Like remember, it's 2 octaves, right? We talked about in the other video, we have, there's 1 octave, there's the other octave. So we can use the higher octave because they're right there, close to those triads, right? So starting with the 1 chord, right? If we were to drone out that note to signify the 1 chord. You know, and then we want to move to the 4 chord. It's starting to depart from your typical like minor pentatonic bluesy kind of sound, right? When you're just focusing on highlighting those chord tones as they are. Personally, I like to do little embellishments to kind of make them fun, you know? Like a little, like sliding in from a fret below, like sliding into that third there, and then resolving it back on the 1. Now again, this is meant to be done without any kind of backing, but once you get comfortable with it, throw on a backing track in the key of A, like a blues backing track, you know, let's say 1-4-5 chord progression, and then try out these ideas. So notice how the notes really land if they're paired with their appropriate, you know, like droning bass note, we could say, right? Because we're essentially implying the chord. And I'm wanting to show you this without a backing track because the whole point is to basically demonstrate the implication of the chord. You can hear the chord without a backing track making it way too obvious. You know what I mean? And then when we switch to the 5 chord, I personally love to go from this triad, right? And then, whoo, that's got a pretty tense sound. It almost sounds jazzy. Definitely wants to resolve. And then it's like we want to resolve it back to the root note. So you can explore and keep the ideas real simple. Just start with the triads. Start with those just to get comfortable with, and you don't necessarily have to drone out those open strings if you don't want to, but it does help, you know, to just like let them, so you can sit there and really associate. But check this out. The important thing, like really the trick with playing over chord changes is timing it right? Because especially if you're playing to a backing track, there's gonna be a static framework of the chord progression, right? So if in the backing track, it's on the 1 chord, make sure you're outlining the 1 chord with that triad. And and not the 4 chord. Because if you do that, it clashes a bit compared to, that seems more like it just kind of is more harmonious, right? But if I have, especially that note right there, creates a lot of tension. It might work momentarily, like that's why you can do like passing notes and stuff like that, like, you know, and then of course that can get into like as like a gateway into like outside playing, right? Where you're kind of like playing wrong notes, but in a way that creates tension, but then resolves, you know? So, you see, it wants to resolve, right? If I hold that A string, and then if I play the 5 chord triad over the A, it sounds cool. It's got a sound to it. Maybe it could work for like, I don't know, an indie project if I want to get into that, right? You know? But it's not really gonna work over a blues, let's say, right? So if we want to just at least stylistically stay within the pocket, we want to make sure that we are outlining the proper chords with the proper triads. And that's really the key to playing over the chord changes, is to just get your timing right and make sure you're playing over the appropriate chord. And then when you focus on those triads, you can start individualizing each note, you know? And then, then it's like, it's especially fun too when you're playing by yourself. You can just like, I mean, it doesn't have to be stuck to it. Like, you don't have to play a 12 bar if you don't want to. You can just sit there and like kind of free form it. And then like, just then when I was, you know, holding that 5 chord tension a little long, it made that resolving on the 1 that much more satisfying. So just consider this your foot in the door with the concept of playing over chord changes. Just to quickly recap, right? You want to highlight notes that make up the chord that you're playing over, right? And you want to make sure that you follow the changes and you adapt to the new chord tones, right, or those target chord notes to the appropriate chord if you're playing to a backing track or a song. But for now, just get used to it. Just by yourself, drone out those open strings and like kind of get comfortable with the concept. Change things up, you know, take it slow, right? Just like, and then like you can just like, I mean, you're in control over like however long you want the chords to kind of go out, you know, but of course you want to get like that'll give you enough time to breathe and think about your next move. But obviously it helps to tighten things up a little bit when you start actually playing to actual recorded music.